Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to those who have logged in from India, Singapore, Japan, and Europe. And good morning to those who have joined us from the US. My name is Shivam Srivastava, and I'm a researcher at MIJC at IMB. MIJC stands for as a Mizuho India Japan Study Center. It is a center of excellence at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. We are delighted to welcome all of you to MIJC's 27th webinar in its flagship seminar slash webinar series. This is the eighth webinar in the panel presentation series called Meijin Samvat, which is also known as Expert Conversation. This webinar aims to foster a discussion on specific topic among a select group of esteemed panelists from India, Japan, and worldwide, who shares their diverse perspective with a larger audience. Our panelists, who are experts in their respective fields, will provide valuable insights and high quality information in the areas of management, technology, society, and culture. So, before getting in straight into the discussion, let me give you a little more about our center and its introduction, which is Mizuho India Japan Study Center was set up as a center of excellence at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. It served as a facilitator for many collaborative initiatives among academia, industry, and the government agencies of India and Japan to work on various areas of mutual interest. The focus of this center is to strengthen India and Japan bonds by promoting academic, industry, and societal linkages. Now, let me introduce the esteemed panelists who have joined us for this exciting session. So, first we have Professor Masahiro Yamamoto. He is an associate professor and chair in the Department of Communication at the University at Albany, which is the State University of New York. And he is a faculty affiliate of the Center for the Elimination of Minority Health Disparities and fellow at the Center for Technology in the Government at University at Albany. His area research interests predominantly are into the political communication, persuasion, and digital media. His publication has been into top journals such as Journals of Computer Mediated Communication, New Media and Society, and other top academic journals. We have our second panelist, Professor Jung-Hwan Yang. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Illinois at Urbana. He is also a Lenovis faculty fellow at the Klein Center for Advanced Social Research. His research focuses in examining the interplay between media coverages, real world events, and individual political attitudes and behavior. He uses large scale data from news and social media coupled with survey and observational web tracking data. His current research is in investigating the mass and the police shooting to uncover pattern and biases in media reporting. We have our third esteemed panelist, Dr. Aditya Vashisht. He is an assistant professor of computing and information science at Cornell University. He also holds faculty fellow positions at Cornell at Princeton Center for Sustainability, Digital Life Initiative, Cornell Center for Health Equity, Cornell Center for Social Sciences, and Mario Center for International Studies. His research focuses on designing technologies for socio-economic development in undeserved communities in low resource environments. His current work is in combating misinformation and hate speech in low income communities and designing responsible AI systems for high stakes setting. His accolades are like it's too much, and I'm just reading few of them. So he's a recipient of various awards such as USAID Seed Grant, Facebook Access Innovation Prize, Facebook Fellowship, UW College of Engineering Award, and Google and Microsoft Faculty Research Awards. And we have our fourth panelist, Ms. Zelly Martin. She is a doctoral candidate in the School of Journalism and Media at the University of Texas at Austin. And she's also a graduate research assistant at the Propaganda Research Lab at the Center for Media Engagement. Her uh, research focus, if I would say, is on the study of misinformation and conspiracies theories on emerging platforms. And her specific interest is in the investigating the political propaganda and reproductive rights in relations to misinformation. So I would like to welcome all of you to into this forum, and I would like to set the context for today's discussion. The panel presentation for today's highly anticipated webinar is titled as Polarized Rhetoric, driven by nationalism, cultural identities, and conflicts, building bonds through focused interventions. I remember a very famous quote that is nationalism can be a destructive force when it promotes intolerance and division, but it can also be a force for good when it seeks to local autonomy against the homogenizing forces of larger entities. In an era where the world is more interconnected than ever, the surge of nationalism driven polarized rhetoric stands as a formidable challenge to the connectivity, echoes the fabric of nations and societies globally. This isn't just a clash of ideas, it is a clash of culture, national pride, and unresolved conflicts, weaving a complex tapestry of divisions that stretches across communities and nations. In this webinar, we will unravel intricate threads of polarized discourse, exposing the fault lines that threatens that very essence of societal harmony. Join us in this webinar journey where we seek to understand, dissect, and actively address the factors contributing to national and societal polarization. Our expert panel will analyze how these elements shape narratives and delve into the profound implications for nations, societies, and individuals, going beyond mere identification of negative consequences. The discussion will dynamically shift towards practical interventions. We'll present a compelling roadmap, construct bridges, and foster unity, emphasizing the transformative potential inherent in focused intervention. This webinar provides a unique opportunities to engage with expert insights and actionable strategies, offering participants a comprehensive understanding of the challenges and shared vision for the positive change. So each panelist would present his or her perspective for about 12 minutes. This would be followed by a discussion that would be moderated by me. The panel have agreed to take questions from the audience at the end. So do type your questions as and when they occur to you. The sequence of presentations would be first Professor Yamamoto, followed by Professor Yang, Professor Aditya, and Ms. Zeddy. So, without any further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite Professor Yamamoto to share his invaluable insights and expertise with us. We eagerly await your thought provoking contribution to today's webinar. So, over to you, Professor Yamamoto.
All right, thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Hope it works.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much again. My father used to work at Mizuho, so this is a very exciting event for me. And so the theme of this panel or the session is polarized rhetoric. So I thought I would share a self-regulation intervention that I tested with my colleague, Dr. Matt Cushing at Shepherd University in the US. Okay, so very brief background to start with. Um, we can safely say incivility is a defining feature of political discourse in the US now. When we go to social media sites such as X, it's not that difficult to see people using impolite, disrespectful language when they discuss politics. And opinion polls show a majority of Americans think the current political climate is indeed very uncivil, and social media sites are one major reason why. So we need some kind of solution to this problem. And to study this topic, it's important to define the term, what it really means by incivility. And so being civil means being polite, being respectful. So incivility is basically the opposite, a violation of politeness and mutual respect. And when we apply this concept to the political domain, we can think of some specific types of incivility, such as name calling Democrats, say radical left, woke, calling Republicans, say far-right extremists, MAGA, election deniers, and so forth. Aspersion, telling a lie, using vulgar language, using F word, S word, and so forth, and pejorative for speech, disparaging the way people communicate. And researchers have proposed a variety of great intervention ideas. Research has looked at group-based techniques in which site users maintain a civility norm by moderating user comments. When somebody says something impolite, other people intervene and say, well, that's not nice. We can be more civil. We can be more polite. There are many great technology-based solutions, interventions, such as AI-based detection tools to block uncivil comments. For example, displaying a pop-up message when a user is about to post something impolite. But in this study, we shift our attention to a more person-centered self-regulation intervention using the technique called mental contrasting and implementation intentions. The idea behind this focus is that we think it's ultimately people who make a decision. So technologies can play a role, but people also can find a way to bypass AI-based moderation tools. Groups can exercise a civility norm, but on social media, different groups coexist. So it may be challenging to have a single civility norm. So it may be more effective, perhaps, for people to self-regulate their expression. So we did multiple experiments to test if this self-regulation intervention works. So we randomly assigned research participants from Amazon Mechanical Turk to one of two conditions. So one condition is this self-regulation intervention. the other condition is basically control, so no exposure to any intervention. And this mental contrasting implementation intention self-regulation intervention consists of three steps. So people in this intervention group, we asked them to use a few words first to describe the most positive outcome of having a civil political conversation on social media. And then we asked them to go deeper, just imagine all the events, experiences, and scenarios associated with that outcome in full, rich detail, and ask them to write their thoughts. And then second step, we asked them to use again a few words to describe the most critical obstacle that might get in the way of having a civil political conversation on social media. And then do the same. So go deeper, asking them to imagine all the events, experiences, and scenarios associated with that obstacle in rich detail and ask them to write their thoughts. And then finally, we asked them to create this if-then statement using this template. So if I encounter a certain obstacle they came up with in the second step, then I will perform something to overcome that obstacle. So one respondent, for example, wrote this statement. If I encounter some mean comments on social media and if I get frustrated, then I will tell myself to calm down and respond after a few minutes. So that's sort of what we asked them to do, to make a commitment to a civil expression. And then we asked all research participants to see this Facebook post about the 2020 presidential election. So the headline goes, Biden won and Trump lost. And then we also presented two user comments. The first one goes, I don't care who you voted for. This election has been effing mess. America, get your ass together. And the second one goes, oh, shut up, Christie, in response to the first one. So as you can see, these two comments are, very uncivil. And then we asked all research participants using the open-ended format, how would you respond to this conversation? And what we found was that the people in this treatment intervention group were less likely to write a uncivil response to this conversation. So that was consistent with what we expected of this self-regulation intervention. We also asked multiple choice questions. If you had to choose one, which one would come closest to what you would write in response? And we prepared, multiple sets of responses. So, for example, one set, so Joe Biden is a thief, he stole the election. The second one goes, I don't believe Biden won the election fairly. The third one, this liar, meaning Trump, is now saying the election was stolen. And the fourth one, I don't believe anybody stole the election. So the first and the second ones are pro-Republican, and the third and the fourth ones are more pro-Democrat. And the first and the third statements are uncivil, and the second and fourth statements are civil responses. So then we ask them, so which one would you choose? And as you can see in this figure, people in the intervention treatment group selected fewer uncivil responses. So again, that's also consistent with what we expected of this self-regulation intervention. We also asked, how likely would you be to like on Facebook each of these user comments? 1 very unlikely and 5 very likely. We didn't find meaningful, significant difference in the likelihood of liking the first user comment, but we did find a significant difference in the second one. So people in the intervention treatment group were less likely to like the second user comment attached to the original post. So that's one experiment we did. in the context of the presidential election in 2020, we did another experiment, this time in the context of a COVID-19 mask mandates. So we asked all research participants to see this post first. So the headline goes, new CDC guidelines set of rush to reimpose mask mandates. And then we presented, again, two user comments. The first one goes, when will this S storm finally subside? There are so many effing idiots in this country. And the second one goes, I'm so sick of hearing you whine about this, in response to the first comment. And again, we asked all research participants using the open-ended format, how would you respond? And once again, people in the treatment intervention group were less likely to write uncivil response to this conversation. And again, we also asked them to respond to our multiple choice questions. And what we found was that the same as the first study, people in the intervention group selected fewer uncivil responses to this conversation. As far as this likelihood of liking the user comments, we didn't find meaningful, significant differences in this study. But on the whole, by and large, we did find some support for the potential of this self-regulation intervention to reduce uncivil expression on social media. And potentially it can be incorporated into social media sites. When people create some account, social media sites may be able to ask them to go through all these self-regulation steps. Again, ask them to make a commitment to civil expression. Perhaps ask them to do it, once every year, for example. So it can be perhaps a very cost-efficient and possibly scalable solution, to this issue on social media. So that's a sort of brief summary of, what we did in this study. And thanks for your time. So I'll turn it over to the second presenter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Yamamoto. And the presentation was very good. And it actually covers the various diverse domains, such as behavior, psychology, linguistics, as you mentioned about the words that that can be considered as incivil, and the politics especially. So thank you so much for your presentation, and over to you, Professor Yang.
All right. Thanks for having me again. Let me do the same. Okay. Okay. So the research I'm going to present today is just asking question about the effects of online partisan media, because in the current media discourse, people are arguing or questioning what's the real effects of partisan media that we are seeing like every day and becoming even more popular as time goes by, and is very prevalent not only in the US but also in other countries. People are stick to the media they like, and people are arguing that this kind of media and information increase the polarization of the society. So the project, the research I'm presenting today is a part of a bigger project. It is a collaboration of multiple people and funding from Volkswagen Foundation in Germany. And thanks to my collaborator and the guests, Pablo Barbera and Simon Munzert. And this is just one study we have done as a part of this project. Let me briefly explain the project before I introduce the study. So the project itself was attacking the issue or try to find the answers for how to measure media exposure. Because as a media scholar, communication scholar, It's a shame that we cannot actually accurately measure media exposure these days because there are too many channels, very expensive to construct survey that is valid and reliable. And there's another issue when it comes to understanding media effects. Is the effects actually coming from media coverage or the event itself? It's really hard to distinguish where the effects are coming from. The other crucial issue that a lot of people are struggling is that how we can understand the media effects is the people who already have certain opinion or attitudes choose to use certain partisan media, or is actually the media effects are generated because they're consuming that. So there are a lot of conundrums and causal relationship that people are questioning. And it became even more harder because we have fragmented media environment. We have TV, newspaper, cable TV, but also numerous online channels that we can choose from. So the motivating questions, very simple. We want to study the real world effects of online partisan media. Although there are a lot of claims about the raise concerns about online echo chamber effects leading to extremism and the online media fueling effective polarization of the society, and partisan media use reduce the trust in media in general. However, lots of evidence on these questions mostly come from purely theoretical examination or mostly come from lab experiment or online survey, which is people are responding to the list of survey questions, what kind of attitude do you have, and what kind of media you consume. Those can be useful, but it is not a very reliable measure. And also, another group of scholars argue that if you're not interested in politics, there are so many possibilities that you can totally opt out of political contents, just consuming a lot of entertainment contents that is available on many different places. And also, because we are now living in a multi-channel environment, the presence of choice is everywhere. So if you can choose into certain content to consume, it can dampen persuasive effects. Therefore, the effects of partisan media could be not as strong as we imagine. The current evidence mostly came from the effects of cable TV, some newspaper, but we want to test in an online content, and we want to test this more rigorously. The key part of our study is to isolate the effects of partisan media use by not giving or read this newspaper or watch this TV show and answer this question right away. We wanted to think of a way to exogenously increase the likelihood of incidental exposure to partisan information in a long term. So the solution we came up with was this. So we designed a panel survey. So in every few months, we are asking very similar political questions to the same panel of people over time. At the same time, we collected web tracking data from their devices, such as mobile phone or their computer, to see and observe their online information consumption over time. The data collection has been lasted more than a year, so we can actually see the long-term media use pattern and their attitude change measured by the survey. So another quick preview of the study design is that we actually collected data from the US and from Germany, but this experiment has been done in the US only. So we are keep tracking people's web use behavior and also monitoring the social media behavior and also monitoring external events that actually happen in the real world. And we embedded experiments during this data collection period. And we measure so many different things, but today I'm going to present just focusing on these two outcomes. One is we wanted to test the popular media effects theories in our experiment, such as agenda setting, political knowledge increase, framing effects, etc. And the other question we are interested in was the question of are partisan media reducing trust in other media? The reason we focus on media trust is that there's a very strong signal that trust in media in the US has been decreased over time compared to trust in other institutions. What other interesting thing about media trust is that it is very asymmetric between Democrats and Republicans. As you can see here, the Democrats' media trust actually increased during Trump presidencies. On the other hand, Republicans, they have very low trust in media. Could be related to the former president's rhetoric attacking mainstream media. So the predictions we are making in this study is that partisan media effects on the mainstream media, they will see a lot of coverages. If you consume a lot of partisan media, that might lead to lower trust. And these attacks will be asymmetric. And we are assuming that these effects can more likely are from conservative media than liberal media. And more details about experimental setup. What we did to increase the exposure to partisan contents, we bought panels from YouGov, a relatively representative sample of the US population, and we did two pre-experimental survey and 3 waves of post-experimental survey. And we gave the experiment in wave 3, so we can have pre-measure and post-measure, and everything is pre-registered. So we gave 3 encouragement to exogenously boost the consumption of partisan contents. We asked people to change the browser's homepage to a news website. So whenever they start a new browser page, they will see the news website popped up. And also, we ask to follow the media's Facebook page so they can see the updates on their Facebook feed and subscribing to media outlets' newsletters. We use Fox News and Huffington Post as conservative and liberal media, and we have control conditions. The reason we chose Fox News and Huffington Post is because according to the former research, they have similar level of ideological position in the opposite sides. So these are some instructions we gave, like give a very detailed instruction how to change the homepage, and give a link to follow the Facebook page of the news outlets, and instructions to subscribing their newsletters. So after following all these instructions, when people start the web browser, they can see this kind of page. And this screenshot is from the same day. And this is a front page of Huffington Post. And this is the front page of Fox News. So as you can see here, they are exposed to very different messages. So in this way, we can boost the exposure of partial information in a more natural way. We're not giving certain article to read. And we measure an array of political outcomes, such as political attitudes, including political behavior and knowledge, and media attitudes and consumptions. And we actually check whether people follow our instructions. And because we have tracking data, we can actually see which page they visited. So this dotted line is when the experiment has started. And as you can see in this Huffington Post conditions, their visit to Huffington Post increases. Same for the Fox News. So we know people are exposed to this information after experiment. And some series of the outcome measures to measure event knowledge. So we want to see people are actually learn about the current events because they are potentially seeing more news contents because their web browser is starting with news pages. And we found some effects compared to control conditions. Both Fox News condition and Huffington Post condition participants, their news knowledge increases after this intervention. We also ask the agenda setting question. So giving all these different questions about different agendas, we ask which issue they think is important at the moment. However, we found almost no effects in both conditions. People's people's perception of most important issue hasn't changed after this. There's another result of statistical testing is on the borderline. But this is the main result. We wanted to test whether this different type of personal news consumption affects trust in media. And we found that people assigned to Fox News condition, actually their media trust decreases. And this is a question we ask: how much trust and confidence do you have in the press when it comes to reporting news about government and politics? So very interesting results. And we tested a bunch of political outcomes, found almost no effect on issue positions. People's attitude about different issues, very political issues, hasn't changed at all, both in Fox News condition and in Huffington Post condition. They remain stable. So very limited effects of partisan news use here. However, we found only one exception: the attitude towards immigration of those people who are assigned to Huffington Post condition became more liberal. So we found one effects of media effects on political attitudes. The reason we are finding the effects on this issue is that this was heavily debated issue, the main issue during 2018. So maybe we can find some effects of media on the most important issue or highly debated issue at the moment. However, we tested a lot of other measures such as positive polarization or turnout. Again, we found no significant effects. So overall, I have three key takeaways. So first one is we found a trust. We wanted to conceptualize trust as a media effects. And we found the very significant effects of this. The exposure to Fox News can decrease trust in mainstream media. And immigration as a hot button issue, we can actually observe the effects of partisan media on one hot button issue. And we also found the very strong effect on event knowledge. Like if people are reading news, they will learn about the political events. However, we found little to no effects on political attitudes and behaviors. So suggesting something like the limited effects of partisan media in a lot of political concepts we haven't tested. You can find more details in this paper published in PNAS, and that's it for today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Yang. And the presentation was actually a very, very informative. And within a very short span of time, you have covered a lot of, the subtopics, I would say, like media effects, trust in other medias. In fact, the methodology, the way you demonstrated was very easy to understand. And thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Over to you, Professor Aditya.
Great. I just need a second to share my screen. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. And I just wanted to talk about, like, shift the conversation from global north to the global south. And if you look at like social media platforms today, they have seen an unprecedented user growth in the global south. And if we just take example of India, it is the largest and the fastest growing market for most social media platforms. And much of this growth in India and other regions in the global south is coming from low income, low literate rural communities. For example, rural India has 50% more internet users than urban India. Also, there is an immense room for growth because about 50% of population is still unconnected. And there are unique patterns in which people engage in the information environment. For example, about 85 million people share their smartphones with others, which means that smartphone is not an individual device, but it's a communal device. Many have never been exposed to the Nigerian princess scam, so they have different mental models and threat models when it comes to assessing information's credibility. And in this environment, misinformation and polarized speech has led to devastating consequences like riots, mob lynchings, and deaths of hundreds of people acting on false health advice shared during the pandemic. Now, despite these severe consequences and immense user growth in the region, there is a huge scarcity of knowledge about the drivers of misinformation, propaganda, hate speech in non-Western settings. And the socially and culturally diverse users in the global south are severely underrepresented in current research advances. And this is particularly problematic because even though 15% of the world's population live in the West, if you look at like findings in top research conferences in the field of computer science, like SIGCAI, 73% of the findings are based on Western participants. In fact, which is a venue for responsible AI, 84% of findings are based on Western samples. And there are less than 1% of papers which focuses on explainable AI in the global south. So my students and I have started addressing this critical gap by using mixed methods approaches spanning interviews, surveys, controlled experiments, design sessions, content analysis, and larger scale deployments to examine how socially and culturally diverse users in non-Western settings engage with misinformation and hate speech, and then design and build appropriate socio-technical approaches to safeguard them from the risks and harms of propaganda, misinformation, and hate speech, and then deploy these tools with the right partners, for example, fact-checking organizations or social media platforms, to bridge the gap between research and practice. And today I'm going to like focus on a very small component of what we have done, which is like focusing on moderating and contesting harmful content. And I'll share some research studies we have done, like in two contexts, like when we look at moderation, like Facebook, where a lot of moderation is platform driven, and WhatsApp, which again like is a super popular platform, but a lot of moderation on WhatsApp when it comes to contesting and calling out harmful content is done by users themselves. So the first question like we started asking even before like building these interventions is like, how do social media users in non-Western settings perceive and engage with content moderation systems? And for this, we conducted interviews with Facebook users in Bangladesh who violated community standards and received restrictions because of those violations. And we carefully investigated the cases for which they received violations on Facebook for violating the community guidelines. And like the TLDR, like on this research study was that the content moderation systems which are used by Facebook imbibe coloniality because they center Western norms, amplify power relations, and erase minoritized expressions. And so that means that it doesn't like just penalize people because they set misinformation and propaganda, but there are like lots of false positives and false negatives and how moderation actually happens. And I'll try to like surface some examples of like how of some of these cases. So one of our participants, Asan, was a moderator of a large Facebook group comprising 90,000 people. And the group was created so that people can request support from others during health emergencies. And Facebook deleted the group without any warning after several posts on blood donation requests were flagged for breaching user privacy. And they were flagged because group members shared their contact details to coordinate like blood donation with each other. And so in this case, the Western concept of individual privacy just doesn't translate well into such local context, because without these details, how would the blood donors reach out to each other? Another example was from Razak, who created a Facebook album on village photography, but it was deleted as one of the images of village kids swimming in the pond violated Facebook's community standards on child nudity. And even though the picture was culturally appropriate, if you go into a rural village in India, you would often see people just bathing in the river. The picture was by Facebook depicted as inappropriate, and Facebook removed it. In another example, and these are not even cases of propaganda and hate, but everyday examples of how people are on social media platforms. A grandmother called the grandson who is dark-skinned Black Diamond as a term of endearment, but that comment, while culturally appropriate in the context of Bangladesh, was found to be racist. The Facebook's moderation policy around racial hatred is mostly informed by racial issues in the West, which do not translate well in Bangladesh, where the dominant Muslim majority is not divided into race. And then we saw how oversensitive some of the hate speech filters were. In one case, a group of students were tomorrow the semester is ending, let's burn the books, and then they essentially were removed from the platform for inciting violence. We also saw several examples when Facebook restricted users for complaining against the hate they received online from other users. So this is an example where someone was abused online by another user, and that person reported the post to Facebook. Facebook never took an action. And being frustrated, the person just wrote that this is what happened to me. Someone abused me, and no action was taken by Facebook. And in this case, Facebook restricted this user for using the abusive words in the post, where he was merely referring to what abuses were heard against him, by someone else, and Facebook took no action. We also saw platform restricting those who oppose the government, taking away their voice and agency. Users gave several examples, and this is one quote from a user who is an activist. I criticized the government condemning the arrest of the journalist. And another activist, I did not use any swear words in my writing, but still received penalties. I'm on the watch list of the intelligence agency. Whenever something bad happens in the country, they always try to restrict me. And this was true for India as well. There was a report which came out recently that the government of India threatened to shut Twitter down unless Twitter takes down accounts which were critical of government's handling of farmer protests. We also saw that platforms had very little understanding of non-Western languages, cultures, linguistic expressions, and they were often misunderstood. And again, there were lots of false positives and false negatives. And this is not surprising, because if you look at AI-based moderation, right? I mean, a majority of AI in today's world, essentially have a patch-up solutions when it comes to non-Western languages. So in this graph, you can see three different languages: English, Hindi, and Bengali. And you can see how many speakers of these languages, which are a shade of yellow. And you can see both of these, all these three languages have comparable number of speakers. But when it comes to online domains available in these languages, websites, you can see blue, a really long blue bar for English, and nothing for Hindi and Bengali, which suggests that there is so little content for Hindi and Bengali. So when it comes to language models, NLP methods, AI systems of today, there is very little data for them to see and be trained on. And we also found that similar issues, that the voices of majority religion in Bangladesh was propagated and supported more by platform, even when it was propaganda and hate speech, and much compared to minority religion. And we had similar findings in India as well. So then the question is what kinds of harmful content exist on WhatsApp groups? This is WhatsApp, where users have agency to take control and call out problematic content. And we analyzed messages in private WhatsApp groups of people, of course, with permission from them. And we found that there is a lot of misinformation, hate speech, political propaganda, and religious propaganda like in these groups. Like if we look at viral messages in these groups, then about 28% are misinformation, 20% are hate speech, 33% are political propaganda, and 21% messages are religious propaganda. We also found that most of this content is multimodal and code mixed, which means that the content is written in more than one languages, which is unsurprising because India has lots of languages and bilingual speakers. We found that in these WhatsApp groups, like misinformation was never counteracted by admins, moderators. They never said anything when anyone like shared misinformation, political propaganda, hate speech. We found that there was no form of fact checking present in these WhatsApp groups. And about 40% of the posts were already debunked by a fact checking organization. And no one like tried to look up fact checking articles like when such content was shared. So we deep dived and asked like, why is the case? Like why fact checking organizations are like not really reaching out into these communities? And for this, we had a study where we spoke with top 12 fact checking organizations in India. And we found, again, like TLDR was that the fact checking organizations are severely limited when it comes to like human and technological infrastructure. They have lack of resources and reliable on the ground partnerships. The current tools which they use like don't work for non-Western languages and hyper local content, which is propagating like in WhatsApp groups. There is little awareness on the ground among rural masses. There is very little brand recognition and influence of these fact-checking organizations. So people know mainstream organizations, but not like fact-checking organizations. And that the fact-check content, like which these organizations are fact-checking, like is not really deemed relevant, like by the masses on the ground. And there are like limited attempts to present corrections in a more accessible manner by using multimodality, multilingual manner. Then we also studied like what are the moderation, what's moderation happening in different kinds of groups. And so for this, like we sampled different types of groups like family groups, friend groups, organizational and professional groups, public groups, political groups. And we saw that, again, like very little moderation in any of these groups. Like harmful content remains largely unmoderated by admins of WhatsApp groups as well. We did see like different styles of moderation emerging in different types of groups. For example, family groups and friend groups were very permissive. Admins were indulgent, they were non-confrontational, there were lots of like power dynamics because of which they did not want to contest misinformation, hate speech, propaganda coming from like elder people in the group. We saw like public and political groups like rife with all kinds of problematic content. The admins, they were neglectful, absent, uninterested, passive. We did see some moderation happening like in organizational and professional groups. So like imagine a group at IIM Bangalore, which is created by someone at IIM Bangalore, like which is more formal in nature. So like those were the kind of groups where like we saw moderation happening when problematic content was shared. And we saw like very little like examples of like authoritarian moderation where like there are like strict rules and like there are punishments which would be given to people. So like all this study and then were done to like for this intervention, which we are still doing right now. And I'll give you like samples of two interventions which we are doing. The first one is like, given this is the state of WhatsApp, that people are extremely hesitant to call out problematic content, like can we encourage people to deliberate on harmful conversations when group members like have existing social ties? So the idea here is like, how can conversational agents enable group members to anonymously contest and deliberate harmful content? And would it lead to any behavior change? Would it lead to like impact on trust and relationships? Because I mean, it can work, but it could also like cause conflict and chaos in the group. And so as an example, like imagine there is a WhatsApp group where people are posting content. There is a content which the bot deems as harmful. The bot like reaches out to people one-on-one, like polls the opinion, then creates a summary on how people like feel about the content. Do they think that the content is accurate? Do they think that the content is propaganda? Do they think the content is misinformation? So like it collates all the data and then sends it in the group. So like our intervention is, I mean, this is just an example like of a bot in action. But like right now we are just like doing a lot of like design work to see like how such bots could be, placed in end-to-end encrypted platforms like WhatsApp and Telegram. And we are doing like lots of work on interviews with group members and admins to understand what do they think would be the impact of group dynamics and trust. Like on privacy, we are understanding like what should be the features of the bot, what should be the values in the bot, and we are doing lots of Wizard of Oz evaluations as well. There are some findings here, which is like inconclusive at the moment because this work is like still going on. But like that's an example of an intervention which we're doing. I'm out of time, so I'm just going to like share this, and this would be the last slide. Excuse me. The other intervention is like given that people don't want to engage with each other, or like because they fear that there would be conflict, like if they call out misinformation, propaganda. And now here we are like doing an intervention where we are trying to understand like can conversational agents help people engage in debates in a more constructive fashion. We don't know like what would be the outcomes, like maybe people just don't want to engage with each other like constructively, but like if they do, then we are defining like what constructiveness mean, like how we can operationalize constructiveness like in an online dialogue, and what an agent can do to facilitate a more constructive dialogue like on harmful content and debate on and difficult debates online. But this is it. Thank you so much, everyone. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Aditya, for taking us this beautiful journey of this rural India and the AI-based content moderation. And over to you, Zeli.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to be among all of these brilliant panelists. Nice to hear everyone's research. Let me go ahead and get my screen set up here. Let's see. Might have to share my screen and then set it up. Alrighty, let's see, I have to put it to present. Okay, can everyone see? Okay, great. Yeah, so again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me and reintroduce myself. I am a PhD candidate at the School of Journalism and Media at the University of Texas at Austin, and I will be presenting on the work that I have done in collaboration with the Propaganda Research Lab at the Center for Media Engagement. So we do primarily qualitative work. We do a lot of qualitative interviews. We've interviewed people in over 15 countries on a range of topics, primarily political propaganda on emerging technologies, but also disinformation, misinformation, of course, come up a lot. And we do a lot of work as well with democratic activists. So we're constantly looking at the ways that emerging technologies are used maliciously, but also are necessary for people to survive and spread true information and get real news. So in this presentation, though, I'll be talking about the ways in which disinformation is spurred by polarization and some key trends that we've seen over the past few years of our research. So, of course, as we all know, this is part of why we're all here today. A lot of disinformation and propaganda is centered around cultural trauma, cultural issues that exist already in society, whether that be religious cleavages in society or ethnic cleavages in society or economic cleavages. All of these are concerns that often spur disinformation campaigns and are the reason that disinformation campaigns can be so successful. And at the same time, simultaneously, as we heard also in the last presentation, encrypted messaging apps have become increasingly popular around the globe in all countries, especially though in the global South. So we see WhatsApp here as the largest, which has 2 billion users worldwide. WeChat has over 1.3 billion users worldwide. And then, of course, Telegram and Signal and Viber are also very popular in many countries around the world, including increasingly in the United States. So, of course, these venues are safe and secure space for activists and other people to communicate and to be free from surveillance from tech companies and from authoritarian states or from just governments in general. But then at the same time, as again, we heard in the last presentation, there are challenges for fact checkers and researchers and people who are hoping to moderate and mitigate mis and disinformation in these spaces, because the content is only available to the sender and the receiver. So it's a double-edged sword here that we're facing. And in our research at the Propaganda Lab, we've really focused on encrypted messaging apps for the past few years, trying to navigate this tension. So the key trends that we have observed over the past few years of our work are the governmental use of emerging tools like encrypted messaging apps, the strategy of political propagandists to combine humans and automation, and as I mentioned briefly earlier, the use of cultural traumas to divide people. So first, the government's use of emerging tools. We've observed this in authoritarian countries, but also in democratic countries. And we've particularly found actually that the use of these tools can lead to democratic backsliding and authoritarian consolidation in some cases. So for instance, government actors in the Philippines told us that they use Viber to, quote, blast citizens with pro-government information, which is not necessarily problematic, but given the current leader in the Philippines, it is somewhat concerning. In Indonesia, a paid political propagandist told us that he orchestrates campaigns to manipulate public opinion for his clients, his political clients, on both open social media like Facebook and on WhatsApp. And in Myanmar, we heard that Telegram is a particularly important venue for governmental propaganda and disinformation and conspiracy related to the military coup. In ongoing work, we've heard about the government's use of emerging tools also in Bolivia to not only spread disinformation and propaganda, but especially to spread polarizing rhetoric that aims to divide people based on class and race. So government actors and police forces might infiltrate WhatsApp groups and then attack political activists and suppress dissent in that way. The opposition government has also even depicted those who opposed her as savages and animals through social media and other emerging tools, emerging automated tools. So we've also recently launched a project looking at the US's upcoming election, and we've been told that generative AI will be crucial. In many cases, in the other interviews we've done, we've heard that this is not really happening yet, but in the US, it is going to be happening this year. And of course, it remains to be seen how relevant that will be for disinformation and propaganda. But of course, as we've all been watching the news, there are already manipulations, political manipulations like the one of President Biden's voice that are appearing. The thing about encrypted messaging apps, though, is it's particularly challenging given that the content is invisible to researchers and often invisible to us unless you have permission from the group members. So that is one reason that we find them particularly concerning from a propaganda perspective, even as we laud them for the safe and secure communication they provide, and we don't advocate breaking that encryption. So secondly, over the past couple of years, we've seen propagandists moving from just using automation like bots or from just using human-generated propaganda to using both at the same time. This is particularly concerning because humans are better at generating, well, at least for now, better at generating convincing propaganda. But the automation, the use of bots, makes it so that the propaganda can spread much further and have potentially a much greater impact. So the combination of these two makes the propaganda have some quality and also a lot of quantity. Sam Woolley, he's the leader of the Propaganda Research Lab, identifies these people as automated political influencers. And so they use a combination of sock puppets and bots. The strategy to use humans and automation we have observed is particularly prevalent on open social media still. So people are not using, at least in the interviews that we have had, people are not using bots as much on encrypted messaging apps right now, but they are using them on open social media, and they are trying to change their strategies in order to make them work in closed spaces as well. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we have observed the use of cultural trauma to divide populations. So this is a particularly relevant strategy to our talk today. Of course, populist leaders rely upon polarizing rhetoric, which might employ nationalist frames to sow division and conflict. For instance, again, in our ongoing work in Bolivia, the disinformation about violence between ethnic groups and different classes actually led to offline violence, which we've also, of course, seen in India and the United States and other countries where populist leaders have gained entry into political office. In our research that we conducted in Ukraine before the ongoing war, we were told that propagandists played on cultural fears surrounding Russian occupation. So those are very salient to Ukrainians. They're quite afraid, sensibly, of Russian occupation, even before the war. And propagandists would use those fears in order to convince people that the US actually has control of the Ukrainian government. And then lastly, we are doing some ongoing work in Telegram channels in India, and we've seen religious tensions used in order to spread disinformation about the war in Gaza and to spread anti-Muslim hate and propaganda. So solutions. It is not all doom and gloom. There are a lot of things that we can do here, and some of them are very much in line with what we heard in the last presentation as well. So these strategies that are used by governments and lone propagandists are obviously very concerning, but civil society groups and activists in every country we've studied are already doing work to fight disinformation and propaganda on their own. In many cases, especially in the global south, these countries are completely unsupported or woefully unsupported by tech companies, especially those tech companies that are based in the US. And it's really critical that tech companies support local leaders and activists, particularly through investing in excellent local strategies to fact check and moderate disinformation in a culturally contextual way. As we heard, the automated content moderation is really bad at moderating in languages other than English, and also often is using cultural norms that are based in the West. So investing in local strategies is a much better solution, especially those that support the people who are already doing that work. We also do need more transparency in social media companies from social media companies for researchers. This has to be done, though, without breaking encryption, as encrypted messaging apps still are really vital tools for activists, especially in authoritarian countries. So locally run tip lines are one really useful solution that we have seen work well in mitigating disinformation and providing transparency for researchers and fact checkers without breaking encryption. So lastly, in conclusion, our lab has found that in diverse countries around the world, in 15 countries that span regions from the Western world to Southeast Asia to the Middle East and North Africa, we are seeing government actors and people that are hired by the government propagate disinformation and propaganda on encrypted messaging apps and emerging tools. And at times, this is really populist, polarizing rhetoric, and sometimes it's catering to the elite. But either way, they're using existing tensions in the society to propagate this disinformation. However, we must remember that communities are already doing the work to fight this disinformation. And so rather than enforcing top-down solutions, we ought to work with these communities to solve these crises instead of working against them and imposing Western norms on societies that have different norms and cultures. Thank you so much. I will pass it back to Shivam now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zelly, for your presentation and sharing your work on different countries and giving us the insight on different key trends. And it's really interesting that you have showed that how technologies are playing role in spreading of misinformation, propaganda, disinformation. And we've also talked about the solution. So my question is to you that what key insights have you gleaned regarding the effectiveness of various communication strategies in countering propaganda associated with nationalist ideologies? And are there specific educational approaches or initiatives that have been taken which you believe can enhance media literacy and critical thinking skills which somehow empower individuals, because people like us who are not you know very much familiar with all these terms and all, and get affected. So what would be the your take on to this question?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I think, of course, it's very challenging. One of the challenges that we have faced in the US surrounding media literacy is that when we encourage people to think critically about everything they're reading and consuming and seeing, they that might lead to some distrust in even sources that we consider reliable. And this is a big problem in the conspiracy theory communities, of course, who are very distrustful of mainstream media and are actually great advocates of critical thinking and doing your own research, which unfortunately sometimes leads to some really harmful and dangerous conclusions. But I would say that in both those situations, as well as in the situations that I've mentioned in the Global South, it really is about embedding in the culture and letting the people who are embedded in the culture lead the way on mitigating disinformation and misinformation. And I know, of course, that's not a very good individual solution, but it is the only way, I think, to fight this disinformation, because all disinformation is culturally contextual. We can't make one, media literacy suggestion that will work for everyone. We can't have a universal top-down tech solution. I think that we must work within each community, whether that's, the QAnon people in the US, or it's, people living under an authoritarian regime in Myanmar. It's going to be much too different to be able to suggest one solution. So I really would say that just grounding in individuals there, wherever you are, is the best solution to mitigating disinformation.
Yeah, thank you so much. So if I may ask to Professor Aditya, the same context that we are talking about. So as an AI, like you have presented the AI-based content moderation and artificial intelligence. So how can artificial intelligence be strategically employed to counteract the negative consequences of polarized discourse driven by nationalism? And what are the specific challenges in developing the AI systems for this purpose? And do you have any insights into the ethical consideration that should inform the design and implementation of AI interventions?
Yeah, excellent question, Shivam. So I am a computer scientist by training, right? And I'm not very optimistic about the role of technology here. I think like the word which you use, like being strategic, like about where technology can help is super important, right? So like as if we let's take example of like something which is not very technology oriented right now, like fact checking, right? So first off, like we need like socio-technical interventions or like social interventions, not just like technical interventions. And isolation is not going to make any difference, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So like even if like we take fact checking, which is like mostly like human today,
Mhm.
that intervention is not reaching out to the masses for several reasons. Firstly, like fact checking like takes a lot of time to scale. You are always like in the present, and it's difficult to anticipate what is going to happen in future. And even when like there is a fact check right out there, like how do you present it? What are the arguments within it? Many of these things like brand recognition, etc., like takes the impacts how people are going to engage with it. So I feel like in this space of like misinformation propaganda, we are struggling with a lot of like socio-technical, social, behavioral like challenges, and like assuming that AI, which is a pretty hot topic, like since last couple of years, is going to be the game changer. Is just being like a bit techno-deterministic and optimistic. Now that said, I think like strategically thinking about like where it can help, and I think like we all are very limited, right? Because we don't own the platforms. And so like we can make recommendations on like maybe like this is the place where a conversational agent can fit in. WhatsApp like doesn't have APIs which allows like the conversational agents to be integrated, at least like the way we are thinking. Telegram does support it. So a lot of this work is like still a bit more futuristic in the sense, in case like if these APIs open up, like this is all we can do, or sort of like platforms, you can do this to address the solution and address these problems. So like community notes or bird watch is an example of it. Like it started as something which was very researchy and now is a platform wide intervention, but like it was Twitter at that time like who decided that we're going to roll it out. When it comes to like AI in the global south, I think the AI in the West looks very different than AI in the global south. If we take example of India with 20 plus official languages, 100 plus other major languages, 1600 dialects, even if we focus on like just the official languages, like we don't have really the data to do a lot of like intelligent stuff. The NLP is still like not yet matured to the point like NLP is there for other languages like English and Spanish and French. So I think even when you're thinking of like AI or NLP based solutions, there are like massive technical challenges like with respect to code mixing. Like how do you understand the content which is written in two languages? There are massive challenges like in understanding the multimodal content like videos and audios and like interpreting it. So I think like AI has a role in the sense of like, can like AI like enable, in my opinion, like constructive dialogue? Though I'm not yet sure like if a lot of trolls want to engage constructively, right? I mean, it's not that they don't know how to write constructively, like it's a choice. But like, does, even if like there are a couple of people who are constructively commenting on a conversation, like how much constructive comments like you need to change the flavor of the conversation? Like these are the questions we are trying to ask. I think like, can we like design new forms of moderation, like, or new technical architectures which really enables people to sort of avoid conflict as much as possible, like in the WhatsApp groups, so like, or Telegram groups. So like that was the idea of anonymization. I think like fact checking, there is like certainly like role of technology in how we can enable fact checkers to write better summaries, how we can enable fact checkers to create content which is not just like a text in English or like Hindi, but like a multimodal content. Like if I have a textual summary, like can I use some AI to convert it into a 1 minute video in regional languages, right? I mean, so there are some places where AI or like technologies have a role, but again, like being strategic about it and being cautious like about it, like is super important. It's a human problem, like it's not a technology problem like per se, or like at least like a mix of both.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Aditya, for sharing your insights. And in fact, you raise a very critical thing that, NLP is not mature enough. Example, that the NLP is also not able to grasp the standard and non-standardized languages, which most of the people, like, in India, if you say, like you pointed out correctly, that we have like 1600 dialects, 22 official languages of the union. So thank you so much. So now I would like to shift the interest to the media coverage and individual political attitude. So my question is to Professor Yang, that in the context of nationalism, how do media narratives shape public perception? And can you identify specific patterns or, like framing techniques that contribute to the polarization of societies? Moreover, what implications do these media dynamics hold for the cultivation of nationalist sentiments?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's actually a very broad question that has been studied over several decades. It is very certain that media can be a tool to broadcast or like sending the messages to the public. But as Professor at TIA and Mrs. Martin said earlier, it is really complex issue. It's not only a technological problem. It's not only the information problem. A lot of moderations or the platform changes once of any like the core issue. I believe that, as shown in my presentation, media consumption itself has very limited information to change people's perception, attitudes, and behavior. I think it's more related, all these core political outcomes are related to the culture and people's identity. And also, the actual politics exist in a society. So the nationalist, the sentiment, it's not only a technological issue. Even if we have a platform that we can perfectly control the misinformation or search like very harmful in discourse, people would still talk about it, maybe in other platforms. The good example is, what happened to Twitter after changing the CEO. And or before even changing the CEO, people are left to other platform if they're kicked out from this one platform. So there's no like permanent solution in terms of the media technology and content moderation or like even the use of AI, because it's the people at the core who's accepting those kind of discourse, and it's a political elites and the relationship and culture in political in politics that perpetuate those kind of relationships. So I think to answer, like going back to your original question, what's the role of media in nationalist discourse or perpetuating or spreading those kind of discourses, that the media is reflecting of the human society, and it is more reflective towards to the elite's discourse. So in order to mitigate the effects of such effects, we have to really think about how we can improve political culture. But unfortunately, the existing governments and political powers in not only in the US, but also like in other countries even more, are very polarizing, and they're conflicting and very non-compromising to each other. So I think as a society, we have to really ask about what's wrong in the beginning to kind of fix this problem we are observing right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Yang, for sharing your thoughts, on how media narratives shapes the public perception, ideologies. Because the reason why I asked this question, because these perceptions and these sentiments also somehow transform the languages that what we speak on social media and on comments on Twitter. So thank you so much for your answer. And so if I may ask to Professor Yamamoto, like since we have talked about the language, that the incivil language you have talked about. So how do you perceive the nuance interplay between online platforms and amplification of incivility contributing to societal polarization? And can you identify specific characteristics or mechanism within, the digital spaces which you presented in your presentation that intensify the impact of nationalist rhetoric, and what strategies do you propose for mitigating these effects?
Well, thank you for the question, which is a great one. So I think online platforms have certain attributes that make people more bold, emboldened to say things that they might not say in the offline platform, like face-to-face. Anonymity is, of course, one big attribute, but there is some perceived distance between, you and other people who receive your comment and so forth. But there is always this, I don't want to use the term fringe, but, minority of people who are very vocal in politics. And social media really kind of amplifies, those extreme voices. And if you actually look at some statistics, those voices that, those extreme opinions, actually really majority of a very small minority. Not many people, for example, express comments on X or Twitter, and among those people, not many people post those extreme opinions. But when we go to social media sites, those extreme opinions, those very controversial thoughts, implied language, kind of stands out. And, we kind of take it as a signal that politics overall is very uncivil. And that is also kind of amplified by media coverage highlighting elite polarized rhetoric, as Dr. Yang kind of touched on. And so the issue is really multi-level, and a solution is not, there is no single solution to it. Everybody has to sort of make a commitment to civil expression. And yeah, so it's a very tough, difficult, complex problem. And that's why I think, we all, like, interdisciplinary collaboration is necessary. It's not just a, personal commitment. It's not just a group-based moderation. It's not just a technology. We tend to sort of, buy into this new innovative ideas, but then end up facing this technological determinism, issues, and solutions collapse. If we think of, for example, COVID origin, we thought, it was a natural, cause, back then, but then now we take another possibility like a lab leak, as a potential authentic, cause. So, AI-based solutions, technology-based solutions, great, obviously, but, there are people behind those technology-based solutions. So, we also need to think about, human side of this, human agency as well. And so, yeah, I'm not really answering the specific question you're posing, but that's sort of my personal, take on it. So a lot of amplification, but it's actually just a small phenomenon in the bigger society, but it just looks like a major issue in society. So, I think this issue kind of also goes back to, media literacy, digital literacy as well. It's not as bad as, we may think it is. But being media literate and conscious of that, reality requires a lot of cognitive resources, and we just cannot think hard about every single, comment, news story that we encounter. So we get kind of caught up in this, implied language sometimes. But so that's my take on it. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Yamamoto, for your insights and specifically talking about the elements, about, like, for an example, the fringe element you talked about, like, how they work as a well-oiled machine during, spreading of propaganda and misinformation. So my next question is to Professor Yang, that since we have talked about the elements and all, so drawing from your work on mass and police shooting and media reporting biases, how can insights into these biases contribute to effective countermeasures against the polarized rhetoric fueled by the nationalism?
Um, that's a Well, I have to think about it. So it's not directly related to the nationalism, but
Mhm.
what we are observing, this is ongoing research, is that there are a lot of biases in coverage. So it is also related to journalistic practices. So, like, think about, like, there are more than 500 mass shooting happens in the US, so which is more than twice a day, like once a day, like in certain day there are more. But how many mass shooting related coverage do you see or remember?
Yeah.
The reason people are not seeing that every day is that journalists and media are focusing on certain events. Um, and they're focusing on certain events. If there's a shooting in the school, they will have generate more coverage. If the shooter has certain other, like some religious motivation or can be considered as a terrorism, it will get a lot of coverage. However, if the shooting just involved the minority population or just like white male kill other white males, they will kind of frame the shooting events as like, oh, the shooter had a mental health issues, not like terrorist motive. So the point is that like when the media try to write about mass shooting coverage or police shooting coverage, there are a lot of pre-existing bias that we already know are reflected in this coverage. And sometimes news media and journalists want to use some religious motive shooting, or the shooter, if the shooter was some illegal immigrants, they want to amplify that to fit the narrative that is existing in current politics. Or look at this, illegal immigration is bad. Or look at this Muslim have a very very dangerous motivation to harm American people. I think that's the connection between my mentioning project and maybe the connecting to the nationalist conversation in media, because that kind of narrative that journalists are creating by selecting certain events out of hundreds of mentioning events every year, they are picking some really like intriguing narrative that they know that can attract audience. And this
Mhm.
kind of practice is not only for the mass shooting, it's for the misinformation, it's for partisan politics, it's
Mhm.
everywhere. So I think this journalistic practice should be uh, improve a little bit, in my opinion. However, because journalists are competing for attention from the audience, it is really, really hard to like change easily. Because if they don't cover these events in a very sensational way, people will probably use different media and read the exact same story they're looking for. So it's a challenging, but again, as Professor Yamamoto said, it's not just like one single solution can solve a lot of like, everything. Every part of the society and every player in the society has to be a little better to mitigate these kind of issues.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Yang. And I would like to ask Zeli about, like, can you identify specific trends or patterns, since you talked about the trends in your presentation? You have worked in, like, in Russia, Ukraine, and India. You have also shared an example. So, are the trends are very different from, like country to country, in terms of like propagation of misinformation within the context of, like political propaganda, and how do these dynamics influence the polarization of societies? Like, if you may want to take on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It is a great one, and we are often, doing engaging in comparative work in an effort to answer this exact question. And we've done a couple of large scale comparative studies where through qualitative interviews and ethnographic work, I would say generally and very broadly, what we've found is that the context might be very different, and of course the misinformation and the disinformation is quite different, but the trends in strategies, and especially in rhetorical strategies, seem to be quite similar. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, a lot of the time these disinformation campaigns work because they're playing on tensions that are already in society. They're not making up something new. And, of course, we all remember in 2016 when Russia attempted to interfere in the US election, they were just playing on racial tensions because of failures in our society. They were, playing on hot button topics like abortion. And these are all things that we are already dealing with, and all they had to do was play it up in order to sow a lot of division, to polarize people. And in our current work in our Telegram study in India, we're looking at the content, so I can't say who's producing the disinformation that we're seeing, but there is a lot of anti-Muslim disinformation and propaganda that is in the Telegram channels. And if that disinformation were being produced by someone who had the intention to sow division and be polarizing, they would be playing on, a tension that already exists in the society rather than, making up something new. So I don't know who's producing it, but it is disinformative and it is troubling. So I would say that that's the real connection across all of these different countries that we've seen, is that political propagandists exist in all of them. And they're all trying to use technology to their advantage and to capitalize upon the newest tools however they can, with varying levels of success. But as I think we've all said now, all of the panelists, including you, Shiva, like we've all said that it's really people who are behind this that are making the meaning here. It's not the technology itself. And the people who are producing disinformation or polarizing rhetoric, they're doing it just by recognizing what the existing problems are in whatever society they're in and then capitalizing upon it. So perhaps, maybe we could mitigate disinformation by lessening some of the inter-society hatred that we all have in our societies, but who knows?
Yeah, thank you so much, Zeli. And if I may ask to Professor Aditya that, since we are talking about the trends and, the misinformation trends, hate speech trends. So you've studied, India. So would you like to enlighten us that, how the trends are, in context of like hate speech and, misinformations are different in like, low income communities versus high income communities, if I may ask.
Yeah, so I'm like, my response is on the basis of lots of studies which we have done. Where we have compared like rural communities with urban communities. And at the same time, like we haven't really like compared like content which is there in the rural communities with the content which is there in the urban communities, like side by side. As in like in single study, like we have sampled WhatsApp groups or like content which is getting viral in rural and urban communities. So like my answer is not very informed, but my hunch is that there is no difference. It's not that people in rural communities are seeing like more misinformation and people in urban communities are seeing less misinformation and propaganda, and like it changes forms or so. And one difference which we saw, that in rural communities, like there was a lot of like hyper local misinformation as well. There was a lot of like hyper local propaganda as well. So in that way, there was not just like nationalistic trends of hate speech and misinformation and propaganda propagating there, but then we were able to see like things which were very regional, which were very like village or district specific, like show up there too. But like overall, I think like there are subtle differences in how people engage with the information environment, but the information environment, in my opinion, is not drastically different. Um, so there are subtle ways in which, like, we did a study where we examined how do source effects impact what people believe information to be accurate. And we saw that people in rural India like trusted one types of sources more than people in urban India. So in rural India, people trusted mainstream news more. In urban India, people trusted like family members and friends more. So like there are these subtle differences in how you engage with the information environment. Again, like I feel like information environment is not drastically different. I think when it comes to like trends across countries, they are also, I mean, the nature of the misinformation is going to change, but like you'll see a lot of like propaganda, political propaganda, like dominating, like in places like where there is like race or caste or religion, like those posts are going to like be prominent. So I feel like the flavor of the problems which we all are working on is very similar. So of course, like there are nuances within it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Professor Yamamoto, any comments on this? Like, since you are working in the health equitable dialogues, health disparities. So, any trends in that domain, if you would like to take us on?
Um, I don't really work on the health disparities.
Mhm.
Um, so can you like rephrase your question once again? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. For an example, like the COVID related misinformation, vaccine or anything like that.
Yeah, so for in terms of that, the kind of misinformation that people are sharing amongst themselves is that it's all like media literacy is very important. However, as Professor Yamamoto said earlier, people are not assessing the individual piece of information they see online and make a judgment on that. And also, there are a lot of evidence suggests that some sort of like correcting work, like fact checking of misinformation work, sometimes work in the lab setting. But if that kind of intervention works in the lab, their friends can easily convince them to believe some kind of misinformation again after the experiment. So the overall, I think the intervention itself, that human design intervention or platform-led innovation should be limited. I think the core problem I said multiple times here today is the humans, the people themselves, and we have to understand what people want to believe and why they want to believe some crazy theory that some may think. The interesting the angle, I haven't done any study about this, is that the most of the studies are designed by academics who are very highly educated. They are developing, media literacy measure, and they check the information before they're giving to the participants and ask to assess whether this information is good or bad. But if you actually talk to the people from, rural Texas, rural Illinois, they are not just accepting like conspiracy theory or false information because they saw it, because they have a lot of logic. There's a I don't remember the name of the scholar, but the one scholar wrote about like all conspiracy theory believers actually have some backing evidence to their beliefs. So they have some sort of thinking process which could be different from like mainstream way of thinking, data literacy, and understanding scientific information. But that's the area that not many people are actually look into and try to understand. So I think understanding those people and their perspective and the way people like process scientific information should be really important and should be inform our scientific practice as well.
Yeah. So I think we are running out of time, and I have a lot of questions, but unfortunately, we have to just you know shut down this program. Thank you so much for all the esteemed panelists for joining us, and we would love to have you here in IMB campus very soon. And let us know for an example, like if you would like to give us any talk and anything. And thank you so much. Thank you. No,